Now, this may shock you to hear, but I am a queer D&D player. Yes, me, with a noun for a name, with these two weird little braids in my hair inspired by Link, Legend of Zelda. It's a really big surprise, I know. Now that D&D has grown in popularity, it has started to attract a very passionate and strong queer community who love to play. And this has been met with some ire from the community. There are plenty of people who are just straight up bigoted and just hate queer people in general, and this isn't really for them because I don't think I can change their mind. But for people who feel a kind of resistance when queer players put queer characters in their D&D campaigns, this is for you. Also, if you're a queer person who wants to put queer characters in your campaign, but you're not really sure the best way to do it, and you feel maybe awkward or embarrassed or shy, etc., this is also for you. So let's queer D&D and TTRPGs in general, but I'll be honest, I have the most experience with D&D, so here I am. So this is a fictional world, right? Is it really important to include queer characters? Should I bring real world politics and problems into my fantasy story? Why do we have to force this into a Dungeons and Dragons game? A lot of people, especially those outside the queer label umbrella, have this worry that bringing real world politics into the game is going to ruin the sort of escapism of it. They set up this fantastical world where a tyrannical king rules over a country and takes from his people and starts wars with neighboring kingdoms without the consent or support of large swaths of his people, leaves the poor to suffer while the wealthy, the few wealthy, get to feast and travel and experience their lavish lives. Does any of this sound familiar? It might, because this is real world politics put into a game. You cannot leave real world politics out of a game. In fact, even the most lighthearted, most casual story is going to have influence from politics, from real world issues, from ways of thinking that we have in this universe that are going to seep into your fictional universe just because it is how we think. The gender binary itself is a real world political issue. So having men and women and marriage and she/her pronouns and he/him pronouns is already part of the political conversation. Queerness is inherently political, and it's just as political as cisness. Unless you create a fully genderless world, which I think would be extremely difficult and extremely admirable, and would still probably be seen as a political statement. So yes, it's important to include queer characters, because if you leave them out, you're still making a political world, but you're deciding to make one actively that does not include queer people, despite including plenty of other real-life-based experiences and peoples and cultures in your world. Sitting down to write your characters, you want to have some queer characters, but what kind of representation is good? You can make them a villain. You can make them in the background. You can make them part of the plot. Any type of representation is good. Villain representation, of course, has been sort of made into a stereotype over the years. Think queer-coded characters like Scar from The Lion King, who has this sort of effeminate nature. We love him, obviously, but we don't want all queer people to be equated with evilness. Still, you can have some queer villains in there. Put a little they, them, evil guy. People will love them. And also just have queerness as part of the background. It's okay if someone is just queer for being queer. It's okay if there's a woman who holds hands and kisses another woman and they're just another one of your NPCs. It's okay if your character is trans and it doesn't really come up. Maybe you mention their scars, their top surgery scars during the bathhouse episode or the beach episode, and that can be it. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. You can also include it in the plot. Now, this I think does need to be discussed a little bit at a table. If you are including stories of queer trauma in your backstory, it is important to discuss that at session 0 and make sure that it is not going to affect another queer person at your table in a way that could actually be bad for them. People experience a lot of trauma in some cases being queer, and it is important to be sensitive about this. However, I think that it's lovely to include queerness in a character's plot. I personally love plot representation for queer characters, and it can be as easy as, I don't know, a character needed to run off in disguise. They put on an outfit of the opposite gender. I hate that wording of it, but you know what I mean. A person who'd always been called a woman dressed up as a man and ran off and realized, actually, kind of likes wearing this men's outfit. Maybe he is actually a man. That can be the plot representation, something as simple as that. It doesn't have to be angsty and disturbing and, traumatic. It can be kind of fun. Because, and say it with me, folks, trauma is not a prerequisite for being queer. Trauma does not have to be the basis for these characters. It can be. People love to build traumatic D&D characters, and maybe this is a part of it. And if it is, it's important to remember on top of that trauma alone is not what builds a person. If a character has a traumatic queer experience in their backstory, it does not mean that that is all they are. I get a lot of comments about this saying that when people make queer characters, the DM or other players or whatever are frustrated because they don't want to have a character that's that flat. And I have never understood exactly what they mean by that. Having this aspect in their backstory is a part of what builds them. It is not the only thing that builds them any more than any other aspect of a character's backstory. The tragic death of their parents under the Overlord, the cruelty they faced at school, and the dysmorphia that they experience from being queer are all part of their angsty character backstory. And so for those GMs who are interested in helping GM for a queer table, you might be wondering, is this any different from GMing for any other table? Well, maybe, if you've never done it before. It might require a little bit more discussion with your players because they are representing themselves in their character in a way that is probably important to them and in a way that you have not experienced yourself. That's okay. People do that all the time in their characters. And that is why Session 0, our beloved, is so important. It's also very important to remember, queer people are not a monolith. If your last table had someone who said, yeah, go ahead and misgender my character, the villain is talking, great, have the villain misgender their character. But that doesn't mean that the player at your new table is also going to be okay with the villain misgendering their character. They may ask you, please don't do that, and that is why Session 0, beloved, you're going to hear me say it again and again. We love you, Session 0. This also came up very often. What should a GM do if someone else at the table says they have a problem with queer representation in the game? Tell them to leave. Okay, no, before that, you don't want to say that one person's comfort blanket statement is more important than someone else's. However, if this person is saying they're uncomfortable with that person's story because it makes them as a queer person relive their trauma, it might need to be discussed. The other player may need to change their backstory or not bring it up at the table, etc. It's something that is very personal between those two people and the GM to help mediate. That is a different story. But if there's someone who is not queer at the table, who says that they are uncomfortable or disinterested or somehow put off by the very existence of queerness, they may need to open their mind to the potential that they could possibly be a little bigoted. They are saying in front of someone who wants to create a queer character who may be queer themselves that they do not like the idea of their existence. They're saying they'd rather tell a story without that person there. That's not going to feel good for the person who wants to see themselves in a story and is being told that putting themselves in a story is the wrong thing to do. Every table is personal, and I'm not going to tell you to just boot someone, but I do think it is very important to realize the difference between discomfort because of personal attachment and trauma that may come up at the table and discomfort because of closed-mindedness or bigotry. Queerness is a character trait that can be just as important or unimportant as any other character trait. Some people ask, why does it even have to be said that a character is queer? Well, why does it have to be said that a character has red hair? Why does it have to be said that a character likes to flirt with barmaids? Why does it have to be said that a character loves to play the mandolin? It's a part of their identity. It's a part of who they are. And it may matter more or less to different players due to their own experiences with queerness, due to their own interest in exploring that journey themselves. And that is okay to have at a table. In fact, I would say it's even great to have at a table. D&D does not need to mirror the real world. In many ways, it is escapism. And queer people deserve to see themselves in escapism as well. So if you're queer and you want to make a D&D character and you're nervous about making them queer as well, I encourage you to allow yourself to do so. You belong in that world just as much as anyone else. And it can be so freeing and beautiful to see in a fictional world, in a fantasy world, someone who identifies with you, even if you're the one who created them. It's hard enough to find out there already, and so why not do it yourself? And if you're a GM and you want to put some queer representation in your story, I encourage you to do so. For one thing, it makes other queer people feel seen, and also you may learn something yourself about the experience of being queer through talking to your player character and seeing how they experience life. Queerness can be there because it is beautiful and it is real and it is part of life. And that's all.